Ever wondered why some African countries have been plagued by conflict for decades? Yes, politics, power struggles, and competition for resources all play a role. But there's a deeper issue that traces back to a single event, the Berlin Conference.
It was a meeting of the white powers of the day. In order to avoid killing each other in front of Africans, they had to agree on a procedure of acquiring territories in the African continent.
With a stroke of a pen, European powers drew lines across a map with zero regard for the people who actually live there. Lines that cut through communities, cultures, and histories. The result? Fragile states, deep ethnic divisions, and tensions that have fueled wars and atrocities, from the Rwandan genocide to the civil war in Sudan, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, and even the ongoing conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
The chaos and the fighting that we see in various parts of Africa are part of the continuing imperialist external control.
But how did this happen? And why does it still matter today? Africa's history is often mistakenly framed as beginning with colonialism and the Berlin Conference, but this couldn't be further from the truth.
The colonization simply tried to pretend that Africans didn't know anything, didn't do anything, didn't have any history prior to that. And it was deliberate. It was not an accident. It was concocted amnesia, because part of the conquest is to convince the conqueror that he is useless and has nothing of value.
Long before European powers arrived, Africa was already a land of thriving civilizations.
Organized living started in Africa. The first organized, let's say, the equivalent of a nation state, or a state with political and everything being operational, was in ancient Egypt. It was the first one. The first navy that we can talk about was also in Egypt. And you go on, the writings themselves, very clear in different parts. The things we call philosophy, that is systematic thinking. If you want to check, you'll find it there.
You've probably heard of the Mali Empire, where Mansa Musa's legendary wealth stunned the world. His pilgrimage to Mecca was so lavish, it devalued gold. The Zulu kingdom commanded fear and respect with its unmatched strength, while the Ashanti kingdom dominated through military might. The Kingdom of Kush, a thriving Nubian powerhouse, controlled lucrative trade in gold, ivory, and iron. The Ethiopian Empire, Songhai Empire, Kingdom of Aksum, and Great Zimbabwe shaped history with their influence. The Kingdom of Benin stood as a major center for learning and trade. Also, this is not to say Africa did not have borders. It did, but they were dynamic, shaped by natural landscapes, cultural ties, and alliances, not the rigid, artificial lines that were drawn by outsiders. Before the Berlin Conference in 1884 to 1885, Europeans had been in Africa for centuries. The Portuguese came in the 1480s, followed by the Dutch, French, and British, and later Germans. But for a long time, they stuck to the coasts, trading goods and slaves. Then came the 1800s. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing, spurring economic growth and technological advancements. It made Europe hungry for Africa's resources, and suddenly, the continent's wealth became their target. At the time, slavery had been abolished, but Europeans still required cheap labor to sustain their growing industrial economies. With better guns, steamships, and quinine, the malaria cure, Europeans could push deeper into Africa.
The question of technology. The Europeans had a gun, and they used to say they had the Maxim gun, which can produce a lot of bullets in a short time. And the Africans, the best they had at the time were spears and shields. They were puzzled by this new order of the white man. And since when you refuse, they have big guns, you get beat. And when you get beat, eventually you submit.
It wasn't just about money, though. During this period, nationalism surged, transforming colonialism into a competitive race for glory. Missionaries justified their actions by claiming to bring civilization and Christianity, furthering the colonial agenda. But it was not until King Leopold II of Belgium entered the scene that the scramble for Africa took shape. An ambitious Leopold, already well acquainted with the interior of Africa, sought a colony of his own.
The biggest beneficiary was Leopold as a person, because the territory was given to him because he had claimed it and he had actually instigated what came to be some sort of a scramble. So the Congo, which is now DR Congo, was started as personal property, real estate, of King Leopold to do whatever he wanted with his property.
Leopold's regime imposed forced labor on millions of Congolese to extract rubber and ivory, with quarters enforced through extreme violence. Those who failed to meet demands faced brutal punishment, floggings, severed hands, and executions. Entire villages were razed, and starvation, disease, and execution led to the deaths of an estimated 10 million people.
Information about the atrocities that Leopold was committing in the Congo had been coming up regularly, and human rights activists or the humanitarians of the day publicized all these atrocities. And the big powers of the day, the United States, the British, the French, and others, started raising issues. And at one time, it looked as if they were going to grab or kick Leopold out.
Though these atrocities were condemned globally, they set a dangerous precedent, prompting other European powers to carve up African lands for themselves. As tensions mounted and war seemed inevitable, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck convened the Berlin Conference. So, it's 1884 and representatives from 14 European nations are gathered in Berlin. Their goal? To lay down the rules for dividing Africa among themselves with the least friction. Key players included Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Belgium, and Spain. The United States and the Ottoman Empire were present at the meeting, but neither had vested interest in Africa's colonization. Not one African leader was invited. The fate and future of Africa was being decided in Europe. Picture this: foreign powers sitting around a table, drawing lines on a map and deciding the fate of an entire continent without any African input. At the conference, they didn't just solidify their hold on the lands they already controlled, they also set the stage for further annexation.
The principle was that if you go to a place and you find a flag of a white person or a white power, you know it's taken. And when you find that place that is available, you put your flag there. And once you put your flag there, then you let everybody know what you have done. If they agree in Europe, in Rome, Paris, in London, in Berlin, in Lisbon, if they agree, then it is yours. And then they order me just to draw some lines of the demarcation.
Once a European power arrived in a new territory, they'd present local leaders with treaties filled with legal jargon, promises of peace, and vague guarantees of protection. The African leaders would then go on to sign these treaties, many of them oblivious of what they were really signing, since most could not understand European languages.
By 1914, the whole of African continent had been claimed by one European or one other, and they had done their effective occupation to force, now this was to force the Africans to accept what the Europeans had agreed in Europe. And that meant creating new identities for the conquered area.
By the mid-20th century, however, a wave of change swept across Africa. As European powers weakened and faced global pressure after World War II, nationalist movements emerged around the continent. Slowly but surely, they dismantled the colonial chokehold on their territories, securing freedom atlas. Libya kicked things off in 1951, followed by Sudan, Morocco, and Tunisia in 1956. But the real turning point came in 1960, known as the Year of Africa, when 17 countries broke free from colonial rule. The momentum continued through the 60s all the way to the 90s, with South Africa ending the oppressive apartheid rule in 1994. But did independence actually end colonialism in Africa?
Colonialism never ended, and the worst part of that unending colonialism was the mental control. So the decolonization has not happened in terms of thinking. So we still have that continuous struggle between those who think that they should be consulting the West or some other external forces, whatever they do, and those who think that, no, that's wrong. We should be thinking ourselves of the solutions. The right to interpret what is African and who should be making decisions in Africa should be African.
And so, the arbitrary colonial borders, relentless exploitation of resources, and economic inequalities continue to stifle Africa's development, fueling conflict, instability, and poverty.
The world must never forget that Africa is the victim of two colossal and compounded injustices. First, the profound impact of colonialism and the transatlantic slave trade. The roots stretch back centuries, and the bitter fruit continues to affect Africans and people of African descent to this day.